You guys, so I have Jeff Siegler with me. I am ecstatic about this conversation because it's really sort of everything that Dam's Given is about, which is how do we sort of disengage from all the noise and all the things that are in kind of the distraction-based economy and really get back to things that matter. I've on a much smaller scale, and Jeff's done some of my own experiments in terms of trying to make local connectivity work. And so I'm hoping to learn a few things myself. But Jeff, to jump in, tell us a little bit about how you got into this, kind of why it's become for you, and yeah, give us a little bit of a background.
Yeah, so I grew up in Lima, Ohio, Rust Belt town and struggling town. And, it wasn't something I necessarily realized at the time. You're not cognizant necessarily of these things and when you're younger, but started to understand later how much that place affected me and my family and sort of our, experience. It was family lived there for like 5 generations and now no one lives there.
Mm,
And I think and I always come back to like we didn't change. The place changed. And like all of our places have changed so dramatically, so drastically, and for the most part, they have not gotten better. They've gotten worse. And so again, I didn't really understand that how important that was until later, until I, went to school and understood a bit more about the world around me. But
yeah.
got a degree in economics and undergrad, and started to see like really became fascinated with behavioral economics,
Mm,
realizing that like yeah, well, all. Most everything can be attributed to humans making rational decisions, and that's been a very useful field, I think, for my career and helping to
mm,
better understand because I think there's a lot of misinformation around community revitalization, economic development. A lot of it's not going great.
mm,
So ended up getting a degree in my master's in urban planning. Worked as a Main Street manager for a couple of years before running the Ohio Main Street program, and that's where I learned so much. I really, when going around visiting with a lot of communities, it finally started to dawn on me after ages that like all this advice that we were offering was not great, was not
mm.
helping. If nobody buys your stuff at some point, you have to say like, wait, why don't you idiots get what I'm selling? It's like,
Yeah,
well,
yeah, 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 yeah.
I should internalize and understand. And what I realized is like we had misidentified the problem.
Mm,
And so the solutions were escaping us and kind of dawned on me that really what the issue at the heart of this was that most residents were really apathetic about their community, and rightfully so. They should be. And if your plan is to bring in tourists to cure apathy, if you plan on bringing in, a bunch of substandard jobs or, build a new Dollar General or Walmart, like I got some rough news.
yeah.
Those things really only exacerbate the issue. Like all the strategies to make communities better, and in fact, I believe make them worse. So I really started to do a lot of writing around this and tried to establish my voice to say, like, look, the typically what your strategies are for trying to improve your community are going to fail and probably make these problems worse.
So, I mean, I've read a lot of your writing, and it is sort of contrarian in the best way, right? It sort of exposes assumptions that we so easily have, and sort of talk tracks that we've been given. You don't even realize we've been given, right? So a lot of the people probably listening, as much as I love our listeners, probably are working from those same assumptions that you're like, don't make things worse, but don't make things better. What are some of those big ideas? A lot of this goes all the way back to like Walmart's running out downtowns, 20, 30 years ago. What is some of the conventional wisdom that you sort of had that aha moment about?
Yeah, one of the I think most prevalent concepts in this whole area is that growth is equivalent to improvement. That
Hmm,
somehow, if a community gets bigger, if they attract more jobs, more residents, more business, more money, that's getting better, and that's such a fallacy. Like there's just absolutely no truth to that. And I'll beat some cliches to death, but that's like saying, oh, putting on weight is getting healthier.
hmm,
Like no, it's not. It's how you
yeah,
grow, not just growth in general. And so the metrics for most of these organizations, for most municipalities, is hey, did we grow? Are we growing? And that's how they determine success. man, it is backwards. And when you grow through sprawl, you get worse. The amount of land increases, so your infrastructure becomes more expensive, and servicing that infrastructure gets more expensive. And then you're typically, when you grow like that, that's national chains are attracted to that type of growth. Like local businesses don't go out in the subdivisions; those are national chains, and national chains are really, really good at taking your money and moving it back to their
Mm,
hometown. That's like I mean, funny enough, but I don't think people always understand, like, their business model is taking more out of your community than
yeah,
they spent. Like,
yeah.
that's how business works. So every single out of town business from your community is depriving you of the very thing that you claim to want. Economic development is really, really good at getting rid of your money.
I mean, the growth at any cost thing is sort of like the poison in all the water, sort of everywhere. But it's interesting to hear you talk about it through the lens of municipalities and metropolitan community, because it is maybe a place where it's easy to feel like, well, that's evident, right? Don't we want more citizens? Don't we want more tax-based revenue? Don't we want more, right? So when you're coming back to people and saying, hey, the way you're even framing this is counterproductive, I imagine you hit some resistance. So what does some of that resistance look like?
Less than you think. I mean, honestly, like once you start, a lot of this is just human nature. And so, usually I try to rely on human nature to explain these things that, it's hard to like ugly things. People don't. When like there's nothing special about a Dollar General. In fact, they're the opposite of that. They're terrible. Like nobody feels attached to those. You go into one of those stores and like, man, I feel like doing some drugs now. Like this
Yeah.
has been um, they make you feel seedy, and when people feel seedy, like they act seedy. Like
Mm.
that's how we behave. When we feel nice, we act nice, and we do nicer things, and we'll make better decisions. So, I like I don't know, the pushback will get sometimes. It's like, well, people love Starbucks. Like, yeah, that's great, but you're missing the point. What they like is a great local or what they like is a coffee shop.
Yes.
And, what's better would be one that is owned by somebody in town that has some charm, that has some character that you can feel good about going there. So like,
Yes.
yeah, you can put in any sort of stand-in business and say, well, that's nice, but it's like, but it's inferior to something in town that would be, have a little heart and soul. So, I really don't get as much pushback as
Mm.
I think people expect because it's at the end of the day, everyone's the same. Like people are all hardwired the same. And so it's not that there's not that much conflict in some of the things I bring up. Like, I just a good example is like it's like everyone likes nice things. That's I work in some smaller, very rural towns where it's like, well, we don't like nice things here. Like, I mean, that's not stated,
I
but
grew up in
that
one of
you
those towns. I totally
right.
hear what you're saying. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's this confirmation bias of like, well, it's run down here, so we must like it run down. There's no apartment, so we must not want to live downtown, or there's no nice restaurant, so we must not like that. And it's like, no, you're kind of confusing supply and demand, and
Mm.
everybody likes nice things. This stuff is like it's. Or I always come back to um, a conversation I had with a woman in Texas who was like, "Well, if we could just change the culture here, we could clean up the community." Like that's you got it backwards. Like clean
Yeah.
up the community and the culture changes.
Yeah. Yeah.
People respond. People respond. There's this desire always to like, oh, I hope everybody one day just starts to love our community. This unlovable place for just that human nature just changes, and all of a sudden grow crazily attached to this place that's not very good. It's like, yeah, that's not how humans work.
Let's talk specifically about dealing with kind of the municipal political sides of it. Like, do you find the small towns have a harder time of it? The kind of the small cities that have become suburbs. For example, I live in a thing that used to be a city, right? Or
Hmm.
live in a rural area that used to be on the outskirts of a city that is now just kind of oozing suburb, right? And I think that's true for a lot of people. And it's hard to think about, well, what is Urbandale, right? Well, it used to be this thing, 5 miles down the road, but now, it's sprawled everywhere. Is there a particular kind of style of community that has a harder time with this? that's having an easier time going, well, then Starbucks is fine.
Yeah, I'd say this, that which, you bring up urban, and it instantly is controversial, for terrible reasons, but it's been such a politically manipulated word. But, it's just the idea of where, when people dwell in proximity to one another, it has been unfortunately politicized. But, this idea of urbanism, like, was pretty consistent for, 7,000 years, built with density. There was walkability wasn't really worth talking about before the advent of the car. Like, everybody lived in close proximity.
Yeah,
Everything was walkable. Everything was locally owned, and things were all built with quality materials to last the test of time. And it's crazy sometimes when you go and visit really, really old cities. You're like, oh my God, this is beautiful. Like, that wasn't necessarily the goal, but it turns out if you couple craftsmanship and quality materials with a bit of patience, things do turn out beautiful.
yeah,
There's this innate charm and things like that people gravitate towards. And the further you get away from that, I think the further that, you know, the unnatural materials, substandard building, skills, and hurrying, and then spreading further and further apart, like, there just becomes less to care about. And
yeah,
so, that's really kind of the I think the key of this is, like, when it's really hard to care about a place, people shouldn't care about it.
yeah,
And if your thinking is, well, it's their fault for not caring, like, you've got it completely backwards. And so, yeah, it is harder to care about suburbia. It really is. It's harder to get connected to your neighbors. It's harder to make friends. It's harder to have a social life. It's not necessarily pretty. There's not going to be as many locally owned businesses. Like, all the things that, are
yeah,
inherent to all the things that make our lives better are kind of devoid in those places. So
yeah.
they're not great.
When you start talking about quality, this is another layer of this. People start sort of their, reactivity picks up, right? And it bumps into things like the abundance movement, and these things are like, well, if we really make it, if we get real picky about what we build, and we don't build enough, and then we have a housing crisis, and the price of everything increases, and all of that. So walk us through your thinking on that. People who sort of equate an attention to quality as sort of a scarcity problem, and break down that logic.
I've kind of look at it as a false choice. I don't think that. Um, I think that we can build adequate housing and still make it of quality. And I'm sure that I'm sure that plenty of people will not agree with this. And I've seen plenty online where it's just build whatever as fast as you can. And that's the issue. My problem with that, and certainly I'm not, I don't want anybody. Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely a crisis where so many people can't afford housing, but sort of the problem with that is when you build substandard housing, it has a huge impact on the people that live in it.
Yeah,
Like, this is what we found out in, like, the '70s. Like, we built projects, Cabrini Green, we built these terrible places for people to live, and then, oh, guess what? Like, they became some of the most dangerous places in the world. Like, well, it was kind of designed with that. I mean, I don't think
yeah,
that was the intention, um, but that is absolutely what happens when you build in that style. And so, there's always this funny thing that I see in communities where people are like, these lousy renters, and it's like, it's the landlords, it's the slumlords who are the
yeah,
real criminals here, not the people that are living in substandard housing that like we all would feel, we'd all make rundown decisions. Um, so yeah, I think that it's a real slippery slope to suggest, like, just put together, build as much housing as possible, no matter what it's like. I think that is a recipe for disaster, and I think it's really critical to try to build places with density that people can, that they care about, where they can feel a sense of attachment, and that like gives them the ability to feel dignified.
yeah. One of the premises that you started with behavioral economics. One of the premises of behavioral economics is that people do kind of what they're incentivized to do, sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously. But human behavior is sort of being nudged in a direction, whether we like it or not. As you talk about this, what I hear is there's just layers and layers and layers of incentive, right? The cities are incentivized to behave a certain way, which then incentivize the landlords to behave a certain way, which then incentivize right? And then you have a vicious cycle.
Mhm.
How do we where's the first or one of the first places where we start to shift the incentives? How do we shift the nudge that of to go, hey, let's make this better?
Yeah, I would like to see, one of the things I think that would be um, easy to consider is a little less funding going towards some of these organization like economic development offices, or not even that. What I don't want to like, there's wonderful people that work in economic
Totally.
chamber and tourism. So I'm always trying to be careful of that. I think that it would be great if their mission started to evolve and think about how can we make this a better place to live? What can we do to make this, or even, what I find better isn't even I find if you approach it through the lens of health, it solves a lot of problems. Like, let's think about how we make our places healthy as possible to live.
Yeah.
That should be the greatest focus. Like, that should be what the chamber's focused on, and the local hospital system, and the Main Street organization, and the municipality, and tourism. Like, if a place makes us feel healthy to live in,
Yeah.
we'll never want to leave. And other people, like everybody will gravitate towards that place. And so I think one of the easiest places to start, which doesn't necessarily have to cost any money, is rethinking the mission of all these organizations. And then particularly too, it's like, our decision making. That's when I go to a community, I don't try to leave them with here's your 200 bullet points of things to
Yeah.
do. Like, what I really want to impart on you is, when you make decisions from here on out, think, will this make residents healthier?
Hmm.
Does it make them proud? Does it make them healthy? Does it improve their well-being? Does it bring them joy? Is it, like resilience or self-reliance? Like,
Yeah.
if it doesn't do any of those things, then, that's when you test it out. It's like, okay, I was talking with another community in Iowa. A city council person reached out and she said, oh, they proposed a second McDonald's here. What do we do? Like, how does that help anybody? Think through it. And in the end of the day, like, what it has the impact on is, it's going to, over the course for the next 20 years, it's going to run them about $30 million they're going to lose. So,
That's amazing. That's
yeah,
incredible.
it is crazy. Like, think how much you could do with that. How many entrepreneurs you could incentivize with that. Like, small shifts in money from, like, hey, we're going to invite in a national chain to bleed us dry. Like, give that to somebody local. Give that to somebody that, teach them how
Yeah.
to run a restaurant, or teach them how to be a carpenter or contractor or developer. Like, we used to be really good,
Yes.
as like, as our kids were coming up, showing them like, hey, you want to be a baker, because I was, and we'll show you,
Yeah.
and that's a business that you could run in town. And now we don't really.
It's interesting because part of what I do is I talk to a lot of people who are doing a version of what you do, which is taking a thing, going deep on it, and trying to make it better in some meaningful way. And these themes keep coming up, right? The theme of moving from short-term thinking to long-term thinking, right? This theme of more holism, right? That, hey, I feel like I'm beating up on my community, and I apologize, community, those of you who are listening. But like massive amounts of work over the last 10 years was spent to build this enormous athletic complex where you can have indoor gyms and stuff like that. And part of the logic of it that I was told by the city people was like, well, but think how many people are going to come, because they're going to come in here to play, kids club basketball and stuff like that. And I, again, at the time I was like, okay, I get it, right? But we really have to, and you can make the argument like, well, that's going to make people happy. That's going to bring them joy. Their kids are playing basketball, right? But I think, to your point, you have to think about that health and in much more holistic way. Because otherwise you end up taking these shortcuts to, well, health means kids playing basketball. And you're talking about health in a much more robust way. So maybe, dig into that a little farther.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a silver bullet itis that it just is insanity that once we do this, everything's going to get better. Like, that's, cool. I'll sell you a diet pill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, do you know how dumb that sounds? This idea that one project is really going to change things. Like, no, people's relationship to their community is really what we need to be focused on. Is it healthy? Is it, do they care? Are they involved? Are they engaged and attached? Are they proud of it? And building a new gym doesn't affect that at all. And that's always the like the line. Oh, all these people are going to come into town and things will be better. Like, why? How does it? That doesn't affect Like, nobody is going to say, "Man, I really love my town more since we built that gym. I'm gonna start picking up trash and showing up to council and telling everybody how great my town is." When I first went over to consulting, I remember I got an email from a librarian in Jamestown, New York, and she said, like, "Nobody wants to fund the library, but we're building a $50 million comedy museum." Like, this is insane. This is
Yeah. Yeah.
insane how much just like how little regard we have for the people that call our towns home and how much we seem to care about people that live somewhere else.
This episode of Damns Given is brought to you by The Guild from Trust Made Growth. Trust Made Growth is the foundation for remaking our ventures and our communities into human-centered form, recovering the flow of resources and growth away from monopolies and into the hands of the majority. The Guild is a free community, what we call a counterculture of commerce, where we support, encourage, and resource free thinking leaders to claim their agency, their intellectual capacity, and their ability to make opportunity. If you have a deep sense that the status quo of the economy that's been built needs a reset and want to lean into doing the work to hone your ability to contribute with peers and mentors, then the Guild from Trust Made Growth is for you. Discover it now at trustmadegrowth.com. When you talk about that particular dynamic, whether it's with, city council and politician people or in other third party organizations, how is that received? This sense of like, hey, we're sort of trading the benefit of our town versus tourism. And, when they see that for the first time, maybe how does that get received?
I mean, if you're deeply involved in the types of projects that we just talked about, it's not great.
Yeah.
But for the most part, people get it. They sort of understand. I mean, it's as you said at the start, like we've been hearing these same sort of tropes repeated for decades. At some point, you buy in. You're like, oh, of course, this is good for us. And then when you stop and really think about it, you're like that, how does that make anything better? How is that any different? It really doesn't impact people, and so it people are typically like, "That makes sense. I get
Yeah.
it now."
Yeah.
Yeah, we've probably been thinking about this wrong. And what I've noticed, like one of my favorite things that um, we have this crazy notion, like with this obsession with youth sports, that like that's the only thing that matters,
Yes.
and it's
Yes.
so out of hand. Because like,
Yeah.
I mean, for the most part, like, I mean, maybe my number's wrong, but most kids aren't going to go pro in sports. They're probably going to go pro in something else. Um, it's this real crazy obsession with youth sports that like, no, there's other things that we could do. We could put that money towards having a nice public space, a plaza where people can gather. We can put it in to sidewalks. Like, these are the things that affect everybody. We could make our community attractive, or there's a lot of things that would be more valuable, that would have such a longer term uh, benefit to a community than these athletic projects.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, put on my hypocrite hat. I have a son heavily involved in youth soccer. And so once a year, we, fly out to Arizona to a big complex to, have like, I don't know, 100 some teams or whatever playing soccer. And I always, when I think about this topic and even this last time when I was out there, I think about that complex and it's on the edge of Tempe. It's like 50 fields or something. And it's just this sort of like with this sort of like wasteland around it. And it's kind of always under construction. And it's just like, I'm sure somebody was like, oh, this is going to be so important if we build this. And maybe it is important, but the reality is a bunch of people fly in 2 or 3 times a year. We don't care about that community. Like, we'll shop at their restaurants for a couple days, but like, and that will justify probably the revenue model is if enough people come to the big complex 2 or 3 times a year, you know, but does it, am I glad that I'm a neighbor to this giant thing with 50 soccer, I don't know.
Right. I mean, that's exactly it. Like, sort of, what are you measuring? Yeah. Yes, I'm sure that brings in revenue. I'm sure it brings in visitors, but is that really success? Like, most likely that those are national chains that own the hotels. Most of the restaurants out there are going to be national chains. You've helped a lot of Fortune 500 companies make more money, while I'm guessing you didn't do anything to help the local economy. None of those businesses are local. The people that live near it probably aren't in love with it.
Yeah.
is just, yeah, these projects benefit Wall Street. That kind of get back to that. Like, prior to, I think there's a big shift, around the time of Reagan, where it was,
Yeah.
the national economy became more important than the local, and Wall Street became a bigger obsession than Main Street. And since then, we've just really been going hard on this idea that if everybody makes money, we all do better. And like, no, no, that's crazy. Like, good example, like what is it? Home Depot extracts 9 million a year from each one of their stores. Like, that's $9 million that could have gone to local families, to a local entrepreneur, to a local developer. Like, so yeah, to your point, that project, like, a handful of people will say that that's success. But if you really look into it, if you really think about how we measure success, it's hard to argue that that is making the community any better.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I sometimes say in situations like this is that, we've spent a generation, maybe more, if you go all the way back to Reagan, focused on efficiency. We just want to make it easy and efficient, right? And what we found out is that the inefficiencies were load bearing. That all these things that were supposedly, made things harder, they actually made things good because they kept things contained. They kept things in a place. There was bureaucratic restrictions to things, right? So the free flow of capital, let's just talk capitalism for just a second. The free flow of capital after Reagan and Clinton too, we got to give him some credit as well, right? Like, yes, there's more money moving around, but where does it move when it moves?
Right.
It's not like it's being spread evenly across the place, right?
Right. Right. It does. Yeah. If an increase in GDP is how we measure success, sure, but that's a terrible way to measure success. And especially at the local level, like, no, are residents happy? Are they healthy? Do people like living here? Do they, are they depressed? Are they addicted? Like, these are other things that we should probably consider, not just money. Like, cool, the realtors are making more money than ever. Like, yeah, but everybody else maybe hates it, or like, those are really poor measures. And I remember a conversation that really, like, got me thinking about this more deeply. It was a woman out in, um, Gig Harbor, Washington, and she, without meaning to, what she kind of said is that every new person that moves here makes this town worse.
Hmm.
And because of how they grow. It's like, well, you want to move here, so then we have to tear down virgin forest and ruin the landscape and the mountainside so that we can build more ugly housing, so that you drive in and create more traffic, and then you park downtown, and like, you'll never really be integrated into this community. Not because that person is just somehow
Right.
deficient, but because we're only developing in a way that makes our communities worse. Like, if we only grow in that suburban way, our communities just keep getting worse.
Yeah, and I can't help but, I don't know how much you give any thought to this layer of it too, but like with the advent of the internet, sort of the excuse is, well, they don't need to have economic, opportunities in their backyard anymore because people can just do business on the internet and they can, they don't need to have a storefront. We don't need to have a downtown. We don't need to do these things because the internet's going to solve for all this. And I think we spent 20 years under the deception that the internet was going to solve for rather than what it's done, which is accelerate the mass evacuation of our physical spaces.
Right, right. Like, what the internet can't give you is the joy of having a friendship, and the pleasure of sitting across somebody and having a beer and a long conversation, or the feeling of, I mean, like, one of the big parts of this is there are certain spaces that you go where you feel great and amazing, or
Yeah.
where you feel calm, or where you feel dignified and sophisticated. Like, that's so important that
Yes.
we experience that. And what we've done is pretty much get rid of all that. Like, if you've never walked into a space where you feel sophisticated or dignified, how are you ever supposed to behave that way? How are you ever supposed
Right.
to?
Right.
Right, we can't expect residents to all of a sudden, lead these impeccable lives when we give them garbage surroundings. And so that's the real cost, I think, to this, is that everybody feels run down all the time because that's what we've built, and they never get to go anywhere to feel nice. And so, but on the other hand, there's like 10 places in the country where you can do that, and they're so expensive. They're hard to visit, they're hard to live there, because everybody with means knows that they want to live where they feel happy, healthy, and pretty.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's come at this from the other side for a second, because one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation is because my individual conversation with those people is there's a rising tide of average everyday people who just like, hey, I just want to care about where I live. I want to be more invested. I don't want to, hide behind my garage door and my, drive through Starbucks, like, but they don't know how to do it. And I'll share a story with you. It's personal. Is like, I had some thoughts about this and was going to work on this. And so I was like, oh, cool. Just going to get some people together that are local and local businesses and people who do cool local things. We're just going to have a cool party. I like to throw a party. Right. So 2 years ago, we threw a 100-person barbecue in the backyard, brought people together. There was artisans, there was the local butcher, and everybody, it was a celebration of like people who are here who do stuff. And I'll tell you, Jeff, it was a shit ton of work. Like it was so much work. Right. And people are like, hey, are you going to do it again? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And again, I might have overshot the moon a little bit, but the point is, I think that impulse is rising. People want to figure out ways to help each other love where we live.
Yeah.
So from that vantage point, what's people's takeaway?
And it should. I mean, I think when you look at, when you break it down, where you live is actually a more critical component to your health than your genetics. Like, it is the single biggest factor in your health and well-being is where you call home, your surroundings. So, like, it should be a national obsession. We should care about
Mm,
place more than we do food, and I hope it has its moment where we start to think about it, where the healthcare industry starts to invest in this because, instead of trying to treat one person at a time, if you made a community, if you kind of thought about if you made a community more walkable and more
yeah.
social, you'd have a lot less addiction, you'd have a lot less depression, you'd have a lot less, heart disease and these other issues. So, but just, just like the other analogy, it's like, look, this huge basketball thing isn't going to fix it, or maybe you took on a party that was a
Nick's
little
big
too.
party's not going to fix it either, right? Right.
I always try to relate everything to individuals. If you want to get in shape, you understand that you just can't. It's not going to happen. Like, okay, I'm going to go to the gym all day tomorrow, and then I'll be in shape. That's not how people work. So you can't. You can't. You have to start by going for a walk. And then you go for a walk for a few days, and then maybe after a month you're encouraged to jog, and then maybe after a month you want to go to the gym. Revitalization is really just the same. It's like, well, you can't start with a huge project. Maybe you can move your grill to the front yard though. Maybe you can meet with your neighbor and pick up trash in your street or plant flowers. Like, it's incremental. It has to be relentless and it has to be incremental. Do a lot of small things that show up over time. It's kind of the, if you incremental. If you
Yeah.
get better 1% better every day, you
Yeah.
really transform by the end of the year. But it really is getting away from this idea of huge projects, like small things, little small steps. It should be social, and it should, whenever possible, it should be visible. It should be around aesthetics. Like, aesthetics are the absolute number one way to improve how people feel about their community. Like, make things prettier.
So if I'm just, a guy living on a suburban street, right? Be out, be out in the neighborhood more, right? What's my kind of 1% type thing? Be out in the neighborhood more, plant a tree. I mean, I don't mean to get super pedantic, but like people, I think don't know what to do and don't know how to be a positive.
So yeah, I think, reach out to the neighbors, invite them over, kind of get to know them, start by building the social fabric. Like, I share a story. There's a suburban community that somebody had shared with me in South Carolina where they started doing front yard Fridays at 5. And so once, like, in this cul-de-sac, like, every Friday somebody else gets the sign in their yard and they're hosting, and
Yeah.
people come over for drinks and socialize. So I think small things like that, like, hey, how do we get together? How do we make sure we know one another so we build some social cohesion? And then, yeah, then like planting flowers, like small things that just make that a little bit of whimsy, a little bit of cute. Like,
Yeah.
what can we do to make this more attractive? Because we like things that are more attractive.
Yeah. I think one of the most insightful things that you said is this sort of behavioral connection between if I feel like where I'm at is good and beautiful and dignified, I'm going to behave in a more good and beautiful and dignified way. And I think that's so insightful in a world where we've so abandoned so many of our physical spaces, right? Like, you know, a random street with no sidewalk and no trees and no nothing triggers me, prompts me for a certain kind of behavior. Whereas a thing with gardens and trees and stoops where people are enjoying the time together, right? It changes my behavior.
And is honestly, I think, the most important thing in this whole subject, that we adapt to our surroundings, and to when you realize it's more of a science than an art. Like, I think it really is liberating to know that there are proportions and ratios. Like, places that we think are beautiful, or places that we want
Mm,
to aspire to. Like, it's not, this mystical thing.
yeah.
And the corollary I'd love to point out is, like, we've all had that experience where you come to a street or a block or alley, and you're like, uh-oh, that,
Yes.
I feel very unsafe.
Yeah.
Like, roll them up, kids. You're literally going through the exercise of your brains recognizing, look, there's decay. This isn't being maintained. This isn't the right lighting. Things like, well, healthy people don't live in places like this. Like, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
You want to get out of there because it's already affecting you sort of, physiologically, just experiencing that space. Imagine if you live there. Like, we spaces like that foster and attract antisocial behavior.
Hmm.
And so we want to avoid those, but antisocial people want, gravitate. So, like, we have a choice about if we want to build places that create pro-social behavior and make us feel good and dignified, sophisticated and happy and joyful and healthy,
Yeah.
or we can keep building parking garages and Dollar Generals.
And strip malls. Yeah.
Right. And, like,
Um,
it's like we keep building the set for zombie movies. And it's like, it's weird that people aren't responding
Behaving
better.
like zombies. Yeah. Okay. Well, the last question we ask everybody will be our closing. But before we do that, Jeff, if people are interested in your work, want to know more about, yeah, other than we'll put links to your book, obviously, in the show notes, but how can people find you?
Yeah. So my consulting firm is Revitalize or Die. Pretty easy out there. That's the website. Pretty active Facebook page doing that as well. And just getting a little more up on Substack under the same title.
Okay.
And then, yeah, on the website, any information about booking, consulting or public speaking, a
Great.
link to the book, et cetera, and the
Awesome.
various socials.
Awesome. Okay. Last question. In all of this, what's giving you hope?
I think that as people are more and more health conscious and cognizant, that we're going to start to see maybe a little more interest in this topic. I always think about corollary topics, and, like, maybe 30 years ago, nobody really cared that much about food. Was somewhat of a niche. Like, people didn't think
Yeah.
that much about cooking or their ingredients, and now we're pretty obsessed with food. And then I think, like, consider that how restaurants and food in general has absolutely transformed Main Street. Our desire to eat better. Like, it's not just been about health, it's been the fun, the joy, like everything that comes with along with a great meal, farmers markets. So, at some point, it's going to dawn on people that, hey, where I live actually has a huge role to play.
Mm,
I want better. I demand better. I don't think it's going to come from, like, car shaming and suburb shaming. I think it's going
yeah.
to happen when people say, like, wow, I could really have a much more fun, enjoyable life if I could walk to some friend's house. So that's where I have some hope.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jeff. Really appreciate getting to know you a little bit better and hear about your work. And you've certainly given me plenty of things to take away and think about. So much appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks again so much to Jeff Siegler. I would absolutely recommend that you take a look at his website, revitalizeordie.com. I think they just did a refresh. There's a lot of good new information there. If you have any involvement as a city council member or some other community group in your neighborhood, in your city, I would just recommend that you think about getting him involved, because I think he has a lot to offer. So, three questions I talk about every time is: one, how am I reflecting on this conversation after some time? What do I want leaders to do with it? And what does it mean for trust? As I've sat with this conversation, it just means more and more to me the more time I sit with it. I don't, one of the things that I wrestle with about this interview is that we weren't able to surface any, like, here's the aha big answer next step. And that really bothered me at the time when I recorded the interview, to be honest. But as I've stepped away, I realized, oh, that's the point. The point is there is no one big answer, and we have to really wrestle with these issues. So then, therefore, what do I want leaders to do with it? I want you to think about locality. You may serve people all over the country. You may be an internet-based business. You may be a consultant, or you may be somebody who doesn't have a clear sense of place. But I would find a way to have one. I am trying to think constantly about how to more embed my work in the places that matter to it. We're putting together some ideas around a location tour to really do some investment and some time in 4 or 5 cities where some of our clients work. And we want to really think about the power of being in physical spaces together. It's our back. Print media is back. Traditional journalism is back, right? Small town newspapers are back. There's so much of these things that are rising, and organizations would do well to get involved with those kind of things and be on the lead of that and not be in the reactive space. We're seeing a big reflexive decline, or at least retrenchment in what's happening in the tech space. And that's not an accident. This has been brewing for a while. The massive AI investments are a long running, fingers crossed, to revitalize an industry that had really hit a ceiling of trust, and a ceiling of trust that's kept declining. And I don't know that the AI investments are really solving for that. I'm not a doomer. I'm not saying the AI apocalypse is coming. I'm just saying we've got a massive industry that has convinced all of us to ignore our physical spaces, and that industry is facing really serious headwinds. Well, there's a reason for that, and we should use it as an excuse to think about other things, local things, in-person things, physical things, because I think it's going to matter. What does it mean for trust? I think trust is incredibly physical and personal, and I even use the phrase animalistic in a recent newsletter. Trust happens in the body, and so of course, it happens in our physical spaces. It happens where we live. It happens where we breathe. It happens where we see each other. And so we have to produce experiences that create those physical kinds of interactions with the people who we want to trust. If we're trying to overwhelm the body's system for trust with a ton of digital overrun, it's going to exhaust you and your organization, and it's also going to exhaust everyone involved, the customer, your team, your internal stakeholders, and you as the leader. It's just going to create all kinds of exhaustion for you. So if we get back to letting the body be our guide to how trust happens and how we build it and how we develop it, we're going to get different results. And I'm hoping organizations are thinking more about that and thinking more about how to apply that. Thanks so much for making it all the way here to the end of Dan's Given, our interview show, which we do every 2 weeks. If you want to go deeper, you can do so at dansgiven.com. You can send me an email at podcast@culturecraft.com. We really are taking your questions for the skinny episodes, so please make sure and do that. If you want to really experience what it's like to think about these things, this is really the place that we're generating some of these physical ideas from, these event spaces. You can join our community at trustmadegrowth.com. And if you have really, if you want to say, hey, Nick, how does all this apply to me? Will you give me just some mental space? I want a thought partner for how this is working for you personally. I do little 20-minute coffee calls, and you can find those at culturecraft.com. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.